David Carter exhaled slowly, his breath fogging up the windshield as he twisted the key in the ignition once more. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then, nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that only the deep wilderness could offer. He muttered a curse under his breath, leaning back against the seat. This wasn't good. Not out here. The sun was sinking fast, bleeding red and gold into the treetops. The temperature was dropping just as quickly. He could already see the frost forming along the edges of the glass. Alaska in the fall was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving. David reached for his satellite phone, his last reliable connection to the outside world. But as he pressed the power button, nothing happened. Dead. His stomach tightened. He had spent years in the field, tracking and studying wildlife, particularly the grizzlies that roamed these lands. He knew how to survive in the wild. But that didn't make his situation any less dangerous. His vehicle was stuck miles from the nearest road, deep within the territory of creatures that didn't take kindly to intrusions. And then, movement. Something shifted in the fading light beyond the trees. David froze, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head, peering through the glass. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was a grizzly, massive, silent, watching, its dark eyes locked onto his, unblinking. David had seen countless bears in his time, observed their behaviors, recorded their habits, but this was different. This bear wasn't foraging, it wasn't passing through, it was waiting. A cold unease settled in his chest. He knew that grizzlies weren't mindless killers. They avoided humans when possible. But this one, it was studying him. He reached, ever so slowly, toward the glove compartment, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the flare gun inside. Just in case. The bear didn't move, didn't growl, didn't charge. It simply stood there, its massive frame barely shifting in the dim light. David forced himself to think. What did he know? What had his research taught him? Bears reacted based on context. If they felt threatened, they attacked. If they saw weakness, they pursued. If they had a reason to stay, they stayed. So why was this one here? He glanced around. No food, no carcasses, no cubs. Nothing that would normally attract a grizzly. Just him. And that unsettled him more than anything. The wind howled through the trees, shaking the branches, sending leaves skittering across the ground like whispers in the dark. David reached for the door handle. Considering his options, he needed to get out, check under the hood, see if he could fix the engine. But stepping outside, with that bear standing there, a risk, a gamble. He tightened his grip on the handle. Then, the bear moved, not forward, not away, sideways, circling. David's pulse quickened. This wasn't normal behavior. And then he saw it. Another shadow. A second bear. No, not a bear. Something else. Larger than a wolf. Moving low to the ground. Weaving between the trees like a whisper of darkness. David's breath caught. This wasn't about him. The bear wasn't watching him. It was watching whatever was out there. And suddenly, David felt very, very small. He gripped the flare gun tightly, his mind racing. There were stories, whispers among locals, warnings passed down from those who had lived in the wild their entire lives. Of something else in the forest. Something older, something that didn't belong. And now, David wasn't sure if he had just become a witness, or the next prey. The last sliver of daylight faded beyond the treetops, and the Alaskan wilderness plunged into darkness. David Carter sat frozen in the driver's seat, gripping his camera with white-knuckled hands. Through the infrared lens, the world outside his truck was transformed into a landscape of shifting shadows and glowing figures. And there were more of them now. Bears. Not just the lone grizzly he had first spotted, but several others, emerging from the dense forest like ghosts. They came from all directions. moving in a way that sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. They were coordinated. David had spent decades studying bear behavior. He had watched them hunt, migrate, fight for territory, but never, not once, had he seen him behave like this. They weren't displaying aggression. They weren't fleeing, either. They were forming a circle around him. Through his thermal camera, he watched as the bears positioned themselves with unsettling precision, maintaining an almost perfect distance from one another. The circle wasn't closing in, it was holding, keeping something in, or keeping something out. David swallowed hard, his breath misting against the cool glass of the windshield. This wasn't normal. Through the eerie silence, he could hear them, not the deep, guttural roars one would expect from territorial grizzlies, but something else. Low rumbles, short huffs, a strange mix of sounds, almost like signals, communication. His rational mind fought against the implications, but the evidence was there. The bears weren't just reacting to a threat. They were working together, and that terrified him more than anything. David switched to his thermal camera, scanning beyond the circle. His stomach dropped. More movement. Dozens of heat signatures, shifting and flickering like embers in the dark. Some were close, hidden within the tree line. Others loomed farther back, watching from the shadows. The bears weren't just gathering. They were converging. For what? David's pulse pounded in his ears. He had no working vehicle, no satellite phone, no immediate way out, and no idea what the hell was happening. Then, movement. Something out there, beyond the bears, moving fast. He swung his camera back toward the trees, adjusting the focus. There, a figure, not a bear, larger than a wolf, low to the ground, but fast, impossibly fast. David barely had time to register what he was seeing before the bears reacted. As one, they moved. A ripple of motion passed through them like a wave, their formation tightening. The grizzly closest to his truck let out a deep, resonant growl, echoed almost immediately by the others. David had heard bears growl before, but never like this. This was a warning, a challenge. Whatever was in the trees, whatever had drawn them all here, was something they were ready to face. David's breath came in short, uneven bursts. He wanted to believe this was just some bizarre coincidence, that there was a logical explanation for all of it. But deep down, he knew better. The bears had come here for a reason, and whatever lurks beyond the tree line, it was coming for him, too. A faint, acrid scent drifted through the cold night air. David Carter frowned, his instincts prickling before his mind fully registered what was wrong. The smell, subtle at first, grew stronger, its sharpness cutting through the crisp wilderness air. Then he saw it, a glow on the western horizon. Not the soft golden hues of the setting sun, nor the ethereal shimmer of the aurora borealis. This was different, fierce, unnatural, a deep orange stain bleeding into the sky. David's chest tightened, and in the next instant, he understood. Wildfire, a massive one, spreading fast. His throat went dry. He had spent years in these forests, documenting changes in the ecosystem, analyzing the impact of climate shifts on the wildlife. He had seen fires before, but never this close, and now, it was heading straight for him. The pieces clicked into place. The bears, their strange behavior, their coordinated movements. They had known. Before he had smelled the smoke. Before he had seen the glow. They had felt it. The shifting pressure in the air. The distant crackling carried on the wind. Things his human senses had failed to pick up. The realization sent a chill through him. For all his knowledge, his research, his expertise, he was the one who had been blind. The grizzly closest to his truck, the largest of them all. A towering beast with thick, battle-worn fur, rose onto its hind legs. A deep, Resonant growl rolled through the clearing. Not one of warning, not one of threat, a signal. David gripped the edge of his seat, his heart pounding as the bear turned its massive head and gestured. Not randomly, deliberately, toward a narrow, barely visible path winding through the trees. David's pulse hammered in his ears. They weren't just protecting themselves. They were showing him the way out. His mind reeled against the impossibility of it. But there was no time for doubt. The fire was coming, and if he didn't move now, he wouldn't get another chance. David grabbed his backpack, stuffed his camera inside, and yanked open the truck door. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he barely noticed. The bear, still towering on its hind legs, huffed once and dropped back down. Then, without hesitation, it began moving toward the path. And the others followed. David swallowed hard. Then he ran. The forest was alive with movement. Bears, massive and silent, weaved through the trees ahead of him, their powerful bodies moving with a purpose that was both instinctual and, somehow, calculated. David kept pace as best as he could, stumbling over roots, branches whipping against his arms and face. The roar of the fire was still distant, but it was growing. He could feel it now, an oppressive heat pressing at his back. The wind shifting, feeding the inferno. They weren't outrunning it, they were racing against time. The lead bear, his guide, his protector, the one who had first signaled him, kept moving forward with unwavering determination. David's lungs burned, his legs screaming in protest. But he didn't stop, he couldn't. The path twisted, narrow and treacherous. It was a route he never would have found on his own. But the bears had known. They had known exactly where to go. The fire was chasing him now, its eerie orange light flickering between the trunks. Sparks drifted through the air, carried by the wind, igniting small patches of dry brush. David chanced a glance behind him. The world was burning. The fire was consuming everything in its path, devouring trees, swallowing the sky in a choking haze of smoke. If they had stayed in that clearing, they would all be dead. The lead bear suddenly veered left, and David skidded to a halt just in time to see why. A ravine, deep, wide, unforgiving. His stomach lurched. There was no way around it. The fire was closing in. David turned to the bear. The massive creature looked at him, then at the others, and then, without hesitation, it jumped. For a breathless second, David thought it wouldn't make it. But then its powerful body landed solidly on the other side, claws digging into the earth. The others followed. One by one, they leapt, their massive forms clearing the gap with astonishing ease. David stepped forward, his pulse a wild drumbeat in his chest. He was no bear. He had no claws, no raw power to propel him across. He hesitated, and then, the bear turned back toward him. And it waited. The fire crackled behind him, roaring in his ears. No choice. David inhaled sharply, and he ran. His feet pounded against the earth, every fiber of his being screaming in protest as he reached the edge. And jumped. For a split second, he was weightless, suspended between survival and oblivion. Then, impact. His hands hit the dirt first, his body slamming down hard. But he was alive. A deep exhale. Then a shadow loomed over him. The bear, watching, waiting. David pulled himself to his feet, every muscle trembling. The fire had reached the edge of the ravine now. But it wouldn't cross. The wind was shifting, forcing the flames in another direction. They had made it. Because of the bears. David turned, taking in the group that had saved his life. The lead bear stared back at him, its dark eyes reflecting something he couldn't quite define. Then, slowly, deliberately, it nodded. A simple movement, subtle, but undeniable. David's breath hitched. It was an acknowledgement, a moment of understanding between man and beast. forged in fire and instinct. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the bears turned and vanished into the trees. David watched them go, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief, awe, and something deeper: respect, gratitude, and, perhaps, the faintest whisper of something else: reverence. He had spent his life studying these creatures. But tonight, in the heart of the burning wilderness, they had taught him something no research ever could. Somewhere, deep in the tangled fabric of nature, there existed a language older than words, a connection that defied reason. And, for reasons he might never fully understand, the bears had chosen to speak to him. David exhaled, turning toward the path ahead. The fire was behind him now, but he would never forget what had happened in its light. David Carter's heart pounded as he turned the key one final time. The engine roared to life. For a moment, he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, barely able to process what had happened. The truck that had refused to start all evening had suddenly come back to life, just when he needed it most. Fate, luck, something else? He didn't have time to question it. Through the windshield, the lead bear stood at the edge of the path, watching him. Then, with a deep, rumbling huff, it turned and began moving forward. The others followed, and David, without hesitation, put the truck in gear and followed them. The fire was closing in. He could see the orange glow reflecting off the trees, feel the heat pressing against the air like a living force. Thick smoke curled through the branches, turning the night into an eerie, shifting haze. But the bears didn't falter. They moved with purpose, keeping a steady pace, guiding him down a path he never would have found on his own. The road was barely visible, overgrown and narrow, but they knew it. They had always known it. And David trusted them. He kept his headlights low, careful not to blind them, his foot steady on the gas as he maneuvered through the winding trail. The bears, enormous yet graceful, ran in perfect formation, one leading, the others flanking, never breaking stride. And then, through the smoke and shifting shadows, he saw them, other animals, a herd of deer, their slender bodies darting between the trees. A fox, its bright coat streaked with ash, racing alongside a pack of wolves that, under any other circumstances, might have been its predator. Further ahead, a massive shape moved through the mist, an elk, its towering antlers casting long, flickering shadows against the firelit sky. They were all running in the same direction, following the bears. David's throat tightened. He had studied animal migration for years, had written papers on survival instincts, on the unspoken laws that governed wildlife. But this was something else. The bears weren't just fleeing. They were leading, not just him, but all of them, guiding an entire ecosystem out of the fire's path. The road twisted and narrowed, forcing David to slow down. His hands were steady, his mind hyper-focused. He wasn't just driving anymore. He was a part of this. The fire crackled behind them, relentless in its pursuit. He could see flames licking at the treetops now, devouring everything in their path. The sky, once filled with stars, was now a deep, suffocating orange. But the bears never stopped. And neither did he. The lead bear took a sharp turn, veering left onto an even rougher trail. The others followed seamlessly, their massive paws kicking up dirt and ash. David adjusted the wheel, the truck jolting as he made the turn. The road sloped downward, a valley, sheltered, protected. The bears had known. The deeper they went, the clearer the air became. The fire wasn't here, not yet, and if they were lucky, it never would be. After what felt like an eternity, the bears finally slowed. The lead bear came to a halt at the edge of a wide, open clearing. David eased the truck to a stop, his hands trembling from the adrenaline. He let out a shaky breath, barely able to believe they had made it. Around him, animals emerged from the trees. Deer, elk, foxes, wolves, all of them, standing together in the dim light, their breaths visible in the cool night air. They had survived. Because of the bears. David stepped out of the truck, the heat from the fire now a distant glow on the horizon. The lead bear turned to face him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. David didn't need words to understand what had just happened. These creatures, so often misunderstood, so often feared, had done something extraordinary. Not just for themselves, for everything that lived in this forest. For him. David took a slow step forward. Then another. The bear didn't move. Then, with a deep, rumbling exhale, it dipped its head ever so slightly. A gesture of acknowledgement, respect, gratitude. David swallowed hard, nodding in return. Then, as if satisfied, the bear turned and, without hesitation, disappeared back into the trees. The others followed, vanishing into the wild, returning to the life they had always known. David stood there for a long time, listening to the silence they had left behind. And for the first time in his life, he truly understood. The wild didn't just belong to nature. It belonged to those who respected it. And tonight, the bears had given him a place among them. A place he would never take for granted. David Carter's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white from the strain. The rough terrain jostled the truck violently. But he didn't dare slow down. The fire was still burning behind them, consuming everything in its path. Yet, despite the danger, he wasn't alone. The bears were still there, moving through the night like shadows. They guided him through the winding forest paths, their massive frames barely making a sound. They had led him away from certain death, through an unmarked escape route that only they seemed to know. And not just him. David glanced in the rearview mirror and felt his breath catch. The animals were still following. Deer, elk, foxes, wolves, hundreds of them, all running in the same direction, all following the lead of the bears. It was a sight no human had ever witnessed. A great migration, not driven by instinct alone, but by something deeper, something intelligent, something coordinated. David had spent his life studying wildlife, documenting behaviors, writing papers on the complex social structures of the animal kingdom. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him to see nature itself working in harmony, as if the forest had its own protectors, its own silent guardians. And now, they were leading him home. The journey was long and treacherous. The night was thick with smoke, the air heavy with the scent of burning wood. The fire was still raging somewhere behind them. But the bears never hesitated. They moved with purpose, their pace unwavering. David trusted them completely now. There was no road, no GPS, no logical explanation for how they knew where to go. But they did, and so he followed. Hours passed. The distant glow of the fire faded. The cold night air grew clearer. And then, a break in the trees. The edge of the wilderness. And beyond it, lights. A ranger station. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had made it. They had made it. As he pulled up to the station, the headlights illuminating the clearing, the park rangers came running. They had expected to see a single vehicle emerge from the burning forest. They had not expected what followed. The bears arrived first, their massive bodies stepping into the open with an eerie calm. Then, the others. One by one, the animals emerged from the darkness, deer, foxes, wolves, elk, all of them moving as one. The rangers stood frozen, their radios crackling with unanswered questions. Some reached for their cameras. Others simply stared, mouths slightly open in disbelief. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. Yet it was happening. David stumbled out of the truck, exhausted, covered in ash and sweat. One of the rangers, a tall woman with a badge that read Henderson, approached him first. "What the hell is going on?" she asked. her voice barely above a whisper. David swallowed hard, glancing back at the bears. They weren't leaving. Not yet. They stood at the edge of the clearing, watching, waiting, making sure. David exhaled, shaking his head. They led me here, he said, voice hoarse. Not just me, all of them. He gestured toward the mass of animals still spilling into the clearing, their eyes reflecting the station's lights. They knew the fire was coming. They saved themselves. And me. The ranger looked from David to the bears, her expression unreadable. You're saying, they worked together? David nodded. Not just that. They guided us. Silence fell between them. The other rangers exchanged glances. But no one spoke, because there were no words for this. For the first time in history, humans were witnessing something beyond the boundaries of science, beyond the confines of understanding. Nature itself had worked in unison. And at the center of it all, the bears had been leading. Ranger Henderson pulled out her radio. We're gonna need more people here. And cameras. A lot of cameras. The footage David had captured, grainy, shaky, taken through infrared and thermal lenses, would later become one of the most studied pieces of wildlife documentation in history. Experts pored over every frame, analyzing the behaviors, the patterns, the formations of the animals. The conclusions stunned the scientific community. The bears hadn't just fled the fire. They had coordinated, communicated, planned. It wasn't just survival instinct. It was something else, a form of social intelligence no one had ever thought possible in grizzlies. And they had chosen, in the middle of their own escape, to lead other species to safety, to lead a human to safety. David became the center of a scientific debate he never intended to start. Experts argued over the implications, theorizing about the depths of bear cognition, the possibility of interspecies cooperation at a level never before documented. But David didn't need debates or studies to tell him what he already knew. He had seen it. He had felt it. Nature had its own protectors. Not just animals fighting for survival, but creatures that understood their role in the ecosystem in ways humans had failed to recognize. Silent guardians. And that night, they had not only saved the forest's creatures, they had saved him. The bears disappeared after that night. David searched for them in the weeks that followed, returning to the wilderness with cameras, tracking gear, everything he could use to find them again. But they were gone. Or maybe, they had never wanted to be found. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of dawn, when the fog curled around the trees and the wind carried the scent of pine through the valley, David would catch a glimpse of something in the distance, a shadow moving through the trees, a familiar shape watching from afar, a presence, and he knew, they were still out there, watching, waiting, guarding, and as long as the wilderness remained, so too would its silent guardians.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.